Hi everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today we are going to explore dyeing yarn using vinegar or citric acid as our acid source. Now, a lot of dyers will use one or the other, and ultimately it is based on personal preference. However, we're going to take some crude looks today at the pH, if I use the same volume citric acid powder as I do vinegar, and talk about what this can mean when we are dyeing yarn. Now, in the future, I might do a more in-depth pH profile when it comes to dyeing yarn, but yeah, let's go dive into it. The Dyepot PS series is an early access series for ChemKnits patrons. So thank you patrons for making videos like this possible. And if you want to learn more about the ChemKnits Patreon, you can find a link both in the video description and iCard. White vinegar that you buy is not 100% acetic acid. It is mostly water with usually around 4% acetic acid. This Heinz one that I'm using says 5% acidity, so I'm not sure if they mean 5% acetic acid. That would be my assumption though. When you're dealing with citric acid powder, on the other hand, it's 100% citric acid. So, and it's not already dissolved in anything. And so you can think about there being pluses or minuses there. For the same physical weight of vinegar or citric acid, you can store more of this in your home, and it potentially could be more cost effective since you're buying a lot of water when you are buying the vinegar. But I prefer to use vinegar because it's easier for me to find in person in the store, and since it's already in liquid form, it's really easy to measure and add a more splash, whereas the citric acid takes a little longer. That being said, there are many applications where I really like to use citric acid, especially for speckling. I like to use the citric acid to mix with dry acid dyed powder to help dilute the powder and easily spread it out as I'm speckling onto yarn. But that has to do more with the fact that this is a powder than a citric acid versus vinegar type thing. I am not going to go very in-depth on the acid-base chemistry, but both citric acid and acetic acid are known as weak acids. I'm not really going to go into more depth than that, but there is a value, a number called the pKa, which is used to tell us how weak or strong an acid is, and is a great way to compare different acids to one another. And vinegar has a pKa of 4.76, whereas citric acid has a pKa of 3.13. And since that is a lower number, that means that when you dissolve them, you can get a lower pH. You can get more acid from citric acid than acetic acid. Citric acid is technically a little more complicated because it has 3 different pKa values, but I'm just focusing on the first one here for simplicity. And that is basically because citric acid can contribute 3 different protons to make your acidic solution, and so each one has a different pKa value. Now, if we were to look at a strong acid like hydrochloric acid, that has a pKa of negative 6.3. So we are playing with 2 weak acids today. The citric acid can get more acidic than the acetic acid, but that's not really the most important thing. Since we're dealing with citric acid in powder form, you can make it more concentrated. There's a limit on how concentrated you can make the acetic acid, because if you were to put the yarn in straight acetic acid, it would be no more than 4 or 5% acetic acid. And you could go add a lot more of the citric acid powder. And so that's why sometimes if you want to control the pH of something and not go too low, it could be worth sticking with vinegar. And I'm talking about using Stellina. But let's go and look at 1 tablespoon of citric acid in 8 cups of water versus 1 tablespoon of vinegar in 8 cups of water. And the reason why I'm starting with this is because that is sort of the concentration that I start with for a lot of my dip dyeing. Right here I have 3 different containers of tap water, and each of them have 8 cups of water with no additional acid added right now. Now my tap water does run slightly acidic. I did measure these all out at the same time, one after another, and yeah, so we will be checking the pH of my tap water as well for comparison. And so in this one, I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of white vinegar. And then over here, I am going to dissolve 1 tablespoon of citric acid powder. In case I want to measure out more later, I am going to use a different spoon to stir this up. Now, we are dissolving fairly quickly in this 8 cups of water, but it's not as fast as the vinegar. So that's definitely one con. But yeah, we are almost completely dissolved now, so that is really not so bad. I think by the time when I go to heat this up on the stove, then it would completely dissolve. But I want it to completely dissolve right now, so that way we can check the pH. I have some pH paper that goes from 1 to 12, so I really like this one. I'll put a link to, if not this exact one that's similar, in the video description. And let's take a look at first, and I want to keep the rest of this dry, my plain tap water with no acid. And this is sort of a lightish orange, and I would say that just my plain tap water is around a pH of 6. Now let's look at our 8 cups of water with 1 tablespoon of white vinegar. And here I would say we're probably more like around a 5. The vinegar is more orange, it's more red than the plain tap water, which is why I'd say it's closer to a 5 than a 6, but it's still very low in terms of the actual acidity. And then finally, our 1 tablespoon of citric acid. And you can see that I don't even need to hold it close. You can see that this is much more red. Maybe we are at about a 3 maybe we're at a pH of about 3. Okay, so with the 1 tablespoon of citric acid, we have a pH of about 3. The 1 tablespoon of white vinegar, a pH of about 5. No acid at all, a pH of about 6. Using my tap water in Newton, Massachusetts. One last thing, these results weren't super dramatic feeling because we are in the acid scale and the paper starts off as a pale orange. When you go in the basic range, you really do see with this exact paper all of those deeper hues, but we want, since we're dealing with wool and food coloring which functions as an acid dye, we want things to be acidic. The fact that my tap water is slightly acidic is one reason why I personally will see some colors start to strike yarn without the addition of any other acid. Something like red number 3 in food coloring can strike really quickly, even right away here. You may now have realized that we are going to dip dye to break Wilton's Violet today. And the reason why we're going to do this is because we'll see some of the most dramatic results. Red number 3 will start striking really, really quickly in even very slight acidic conditions. The blue number 1 needs things to be more acidic. So my hypothesis right now is with the vinegar, well, it's my standard conditions. So we are gonna see a beautiful broken violet colorway, and I'll do that one first, and that's gonna be sort of what we expect. With the citric acid, I expect that we will still see some breaking, but we're not gonna capture those bright blues at the end as easily. We might get some blue at the end, but it's gonna be less vibrant because those blues are gonna start to strike along with the reds. And with no acid, we will also see some amount of breaking there, but I expect everything will be way more subtle overall. A lot of times people ask, and I even just got a comment right now, what if you want a solid purple? Is there any way not to break Wilton's Violet? And it's hard. I think, maybe at the end we will try that, just as a little bonus. But as we go get started, and I'm going to turn the stove on, I would like to give a huge shout out to Karen Siegel and the rest of the Fiber patrons. You'll see their names crossing the screen right now. Thank you, patrons, for making content like this possible. And if you want early access to new content, behind the scenes sneak peeks, and more, check out the ChemKnits Patreon. Today we are going to play with Knit Picks Wool of the Andes worsted weight yarn. This is 100% Peruvian Highland wool. I picked this because we are able to get a really dramatic separation between the red and the blue in Wilton's Violet. And, you know, I don't want to use something that's superwash that will sort of speed that up and make it a little harder to capture that breaking. I am using some brand new reusable zip ties since we are dealing with food safe things today. When I'm done with the brand new zip ties, they sort of move on over into my general collection, but I do reuse them over and over and over with my dedicated dye equipment. I took a brand new vial of Wilton's Violet icing color, and 3 times I dissolved a ½ teaspoon of the icing color in ½ cup of warm tap water, stirring it up to dissolve it. This is our vinegar pot. We are just below boil. If we were at a boil, I would just reduce the heat. I am going to add our color, stir it up. This pot's a little full. I'm not a little nervous about that, but we are going to start dip dyeing. And you can see as I lift the yarn back up, it looks purple in the water, but as I pick it back up, you sort of see that blue shift down and it looks more pink. And this is because of the color breaking. And so those pinks are going to absorb first, and you want to do this fairly slowly, but even now you can start to see some of those blues, but there's still plenty of pink. We basically want to keep going until we see a lot of bright blue. And if I put it in, we see that bright blue there, but if I raise it up, I'm still seeing a tiny bit of pink. So I am even going to wait a tiny bit longer, but I'm going to leave that in. And as I lift it up, we are looking for less and less pink on that edge. If this were a superwash yarn, and now I'm going to go in with this edge and shimmy it around, we have got that bright blue. If the water were more acidic already, or if this were a superwash yarn, we would not get something that is this vibrant blue, because the blues would start striking. But you saw that each time I lifted it up, the blue water sort of drained back down because it's not yet acidic enough for those blues to strike. And that is why we can see this dramatic breaking. And I probably still went in, oops, a tad early. You can see a little bit of pink there in that bright end, but I'm not going to worry a ton. I'm going to go ahead actually and add some more vinegar right now. Sometimes I like to wait, but I don't think that we really need to. You guys saw that dramatic breaking, and I am going to grab a 2nd tablespoon of white vinegar. You can see when I poured that on that some of those blue colors have not yet, struck. And I'm just quickly lifting it up and lowering it down, shimmying that in. And now we should start to see these blue colors start to strike. So now I'm going to wait 10 minutes and we will come back. Okay, it's been 10 minutes. There's still a bit of blue left, but a lot of it has absorbed. But now let's check in on the pH. So with the 2 tablespoons of vinegar, I would say that maybe we're around a 5. Let's go ahead and add, since there's still some color left in here, 1 more tablespoon of white vinegar. When I checked earlier, the blue color did make it a little harder to read the color. So let's add 1 more tablespoon of vinegar. Ooh, that's hot. We are gonna stir things up. And let's check the pH now. And I would say You know, even with 1 more tablespoon of vinegar, maybe it's slightly more red, but we are in about a similar place with a pH maybe around 5. And now we have 3 tablespoons of vinegar total added in there. I just dipped some pH paper into some straight vinegar, and it looks like a pH of about 4. So there is a limit with how acidic you can make something with vinegar, because we could add straight vinegar into there and it won't get that much more acidic. Now, granted, 3 tablespoons is more acidic than 1. We're just not able to measure it with this pH paper. If I had a pH meter, which I think I do have somewhere, we would be able to do that a lot more accurately. But we cannot lower the pH more than just straight vinegar. But with citric acid, we're already pretty low. I just started heating up our water with the tablespoon of citric acid, and I would say that the 1 tablespoon of citric acid in 8 cups of water is more acidic than straight vinegar. This is about a 3, this is about a 4. So this is actually a really good comparison to know that this is more acidic than straight vinegar. And so, yeah, we will see what happens. But first I'm gonna let this heat up, and with the other yarn, I'm gonna leave it on just really low heat for a little longer, just to absorb the rest of that color. I just reduced the heat, stirring up the dye. I expect we'll probably see some pinks crashing out because this is so acidic, but let's start dipping. Ooh, it's looking very bluish. I've seen when you mix the Wilton's Violet into vinegar that it does look fairly bluish. So that's sort of different than the bright blue that we see and can expect to see towards the end. It does look like, I don't want to go too fast, but the color is getting more pastel compared to that bright blue that we saw last time. I think that we're getting some blues to strike. And now, you know, the color is more pastel. There actually are some pinks left, but if we look at this color, this is similar to what we saw near the end of the other one. It's just that those blues are striking really fast. And wow, I didn't even capture all of the pinks, probably because, but those blues are just almost gone already. Wow, we got a fairly purpley gradient here. This, honestly, this looks a lot like when I did cereal dilutions. I was doing some like Matha yarn dyeing with the food coloring, and this is closer to what we got. It almost feels unbroken, even though you did see it breaking, and you can see that blue at the end, but you did see it breaking as we were dip dyeing. But I think that this is the most acidic that I have ever done with breaking Wilton's Violet. Just look at the dramatic difference that we have here. The blues, and we needed to add more acid to capture those, and here we really don't see that. But these middles and ends, I think, are more purple, whoops, versus pink overall as well. I am going to let this sit on low heat for another 10 minutes. Once the yarn absorbs all the color in our first 2 examples, we are going to try this for a 3rd time, starting with no acid at all, to see what we can see so that way we can compare it. I know that the results today are fairly qualitative, but there are a few things I have been able to demonstrate with certainty. When you have things that are more acidic, color breaking is much less dramatic. And there are cases with some acid dyes where we see color breaking, but I'm not really able to capture it. And it's possible that if I were to reduce the acid even more, I might be able to sort of make the breaking a little more extreme. And yeah, there's a big pH difference between 1 tablespoon of white vinegar and 1 tablespoon of citric acid. The pH scale is logarithmic. So the difference between a pH of 5 and a pH of 3 is actually a difference of 100, not a difference of like 2. And after we try with no acid, I think that we might try something else. I think we should try to make a stock solution of citric acid in the same way we prepared it before. 1 tablespoon of citric acid in 8 cups of water. And then we can try seeing what happens if we use 1 tablespoon of that mixture. Is that gonna be closer to what we got with vinegar? It's not gonna be exact, but yeah, that is my plan and my thoughts, at least initially. Why does pH matter at all? You need acid to get food coloring or acid dyes to strike to protein fibers. But the pH does affect the rate that these colors absorb. The higher the pH, the faster colors might absorb. At least with some colors. Some are much more pH dependent than others, like in food coloring, the blue number 1. And so this can make a difference if you want colors to strike really fast with hand painting, have things being more acidic. But in low immersion, maybe if you want the colors to spread more, use a lower pH to allow them to strike slower and you get more of a spread. And so that's one way that the pH that you use can make a difference. It also can make a difference if you're just kettle dyeing for a semi-solid tonal yarn. If you start with no extra acid, you will be able to get more subtle variation of the tones in your yarn. But if you start with high acid and you have the heat on, those colors will start to strike as soon as you add the yarn and you'll get more tonal variation. It's just another way, along with heat, that you can control the way that you're adding your color to your yarn. There's a slight pink tinge to this water, but I'm going to try not to worry about it because the pigmentation of our broken violet is just so much stronger. Okay, and we've got no acid in this one. And we are going to dip. I wonder if the pinks will start striking. I think if this were super washable, the pinks would start striking already with no acid. But, and I'm gonna raise the heat a little bit here, you know, it's looking, the pinks might be striking somewhat, but it's no question slower than what we were doing before. And I think I'm gonna speed this up. I spent 5 minutes dip dyeing this skein into the Wilton's Violet food coloring with no additional acid. Colors were striking slowly, but each time I went and checked with a spoon, the color still looked distinctively purple. Do we have breaking in here? Absolutely. There is more pink and there is more blue at the end, but the red is absorbing so slow that it is physically more difficult to dip dye. I had to like switch hands back and forth. So I think that 1 tablespoon of white vinegar is sort of perfect for capturing my classic broken violet colorway. And here we are after those 5 minutes. It's still reading very purple to me, but I do notice a difference between the pink outside and that blue interior. This time, since not all of the reds have bound, I'm gonna let this sit for 10 minutes before we go and add some acid. That way, you know, we won't alter things by adding the vinegar and mixing it up. 10 minutes later, there's still some red in there. And all of the blue. I mean, all of the blue is in here too. I am not even going to measure right now. I am just going to add a splash of vinegar. A nice, good old splash. There is definitely, we can see some breaking because the pinks, we do have a bit of a gradient of pinks. But this is going to be nowhere near as extreme as what we saw when we started at the 1 tablespoon of white vinegar. So I'm actually going to go and set this on the back burner. We're going to let it cook for a good other 10 minutes, and let's play with our final one. Off camera, I just mixed 1 tablespoon of citric acid into 8 cups of water. I took 1 tablespoon of that mixture and put it in this pot. Thought I was recording. Guess I wasn't. Let's check this new dye bath. Oh, maybe it's around a 6. Maybe it's around a 6. I think I might want to add 1 more tablespoon, honestly. Let's make it 2. I'm looking. Yeah, I'd say that with 2 tablespoons we are around like a 6, a good 6, but I think that we are definitely, I'll go check on some tap water in a moment. Okay, here is our tap water, which is about a 6, and then here is our citric acid mixture. It has 2 tablespoons of the 1 tablespoon of citric acid mixed in 8 cups of water. And so you can see that this one is more orange than the first one, so we are more acidic, but it is a slight difference. Whereas our 1 tablespoon of citric acid that we use as that stock is around a pH of 3. Again, really, really qualitative, but the hope is that by doing the citric acid dilution, we'll get something that looks more like that broken violet that we're used to. I'm expecting to get something between that and this. For comparison's sake, this is the broken violet with 1 tablespoon of white vinegar. And that is with no acid. Still slightly broken, nothing like this. Okay, this is our moment of truth. I'm going to reduce the heat. I've got my molten violet ready to go, 1/2 teaspoon and 1/2 cup of water. Stir this up. Cup is nice and mostly empty. And let's start dip dyeing. I have not tried doing this colorway with citric acid, so we will see what happens. And oh, I want to make sure, why do I always forget to have a spoon? I like reach across the kitchen. Okay, so we're very purpley still. I don't want to go too slow, but I also don't want to go too fast. Okay, it's looking a little bluer to me. It's possible I could have done more. I didn't calculate how much citric acid I could use, but I was like, okay, so that mixture is roughly the same pH. But again, everything I'm doing today is so qualitative that it's hard to say for sure. But you can see it's getting bluer over there. And we are definitely getting bluer here as well. But you don't want to rush. If I were to go and dip into the end right now, then we might get some blues, but we still, okay, we're getting nice and blue. But if I remove it, we still do have some pinks there. So, oof, this is pretty good. Sort of hovering, because I don't want to like miss it, but I also like don't want to get too pink at the edge, because if the acid is too high, then the blues will start absorbing down here. That's pretty darn good. I'm going to go ahead and plop, and there we go. We have, it might be a little purpley because I might have gone a little too fast, but this is pretty darn close to our broken violet, and now that is looking very, very blue to me. I am not going to add more acid yet. I'm going to let this sit for 10 minutes. But of all the ones we've done, this is the one that is so far the most similar to the vinegar. So we can accomplish this with a similar technique. So why do I use vinegar more than citric acid? And the real answer is because I'm more comfortable with vinegar. I started off using vinegar and it is what I know. Like for example, I know that the 1 tablespoon of white vinegar is in 8 cups of water is the amount I need to get that perfect bright blue at the end of a dip dyed broken violet colorway. And I don't yet have that same handle on the proportions with citric acid, but this is something that you can get the more you use it. And if the scent of vinegar bothers you, go for citric acid and make some kind, you can make a stock solution and keep it in even an old vinegar jug and use that. It's just the actual proportions and the amount of that you use might be slightly different. That being said, with tap water, well water, water varies based on where you are. I'm using tap water, which you saw is slightly acidic. And other places your tap water might be a little more basic. And so therefore, to get the same results with breaking violet, you might need a little more acid than when I use. Or if your water is more acidic than mine, you might need a little less. And so I guess you take everything that Swinnell says with a grain of salt, but now you know that you can go check the pH and then troubleshoot from there. The 10 minutes aren't up yet, but I do want to show we've got those bright blues. I think that I did add all the yarn in a little bit too soon because around this edge there is a lot of pink there as well, which makes this one look a little more similar to the no acid, but unlike the no acid, it was working here. I just needed to wait, I think, a tiny bit, it's about 5 minutes in, a tiny bit longer. And that amount of time would not have worked with our no acid version. So this one is not yet perfected. Maybe I should have started with 3 tablespoons of that mixture to have a tiny bit more acid, but this is something that I could troubleshoot and perfect going forward. I'm not going to do that today, but it is possible and we're on the right track. I am curious how this will compare with our no acid one later on. But for now, let's just see, we still have a lot of that blue, and I am going, just adding a nice healthy pour of our citric acid-y water in here to make it more acidic. I'm going to come and add even more. 1, 2, that's like a whole cup of it. That's a lot of acid for us now. And I'm going to let things sit another 10 minutes so we can absorb the rest of that color. All right, it's been 10 minutes. And the water is almost completely clear. I'm going to turn off the heat and let this sit in the pot for a while. While this breaking isn't quite as perfect as my perfection, you can see already, just even in the water, that this is more broken than what we got over there. So why do I use vinegar more than citric acid? And the real answer is because I'm more comfortable with vinegar. I started off using vinegar and it is what I know. Like for example, I know that the 1 tablespoon of white vinegar is in 8 cups of water is the amount I need to get that perfect bright blue at the end of a dip dyed broken violet colorway. And I don't yet have that same handle on the proportions with citric acid, but this is something that you can get the more you use it. And if the scent of vinegar bothers you, go for citric acid and make some kind, you can make a stock solution and keep it in even an old vinegar jug and use that. It's just the actual proportions and the amount of that you use might be slightly different. That being said, with tap water, well water, water varies based on where you are. I'm using tap water, which you saw is slightly acidic. And other places your tap water might be a little more basic. And so therefore, to get the same results with breaking violet, you might need a little more acid than when I use. Or if your water is more acidic than mine, you might need a little less. And so I guess you take everything that Swinnell says with a grain of salt, but now you know that you can go check the pH and then troubleshoot from there. I am going to go for a solid Wilton's Violet, semi-solid Wilton's Violet again, but I'm going to do that as a separate video because I think that People ask for that often enough that it deserves to be its own, have its own moment. But I will link to that in the video description and iCard here. All right, we have the 4 different dip dyed broken violet attempts. This is my standard 1 tablespoon of white vinegar at the start. 1 tablespoon of citric acid pretty much got us like a gradient of purple. I am amazed. This does not, at least wet, does not look very broken at all. I am mega impressed here. With no acid, we definitely have some breaking. Not very much, but you do see some blue, some pink, and then a lot of purple there. So, you know, we've been talking, and I was filming a video on like how to make an unbroken violet, starting cool with no acid and slowly adding vinegar and heat. But it seems like another way is just to up the acid enough that things strike really fast, and so there's not really time for the blues to spread. If we had left a little bit out of the water and added it in at the end, we probably would see some breaking, but we weren't able to capture those blues. We got more of that purple finish. Finally, I used 2 tablespoons of our citric acid mixture, a new citric acid mixture that started off with 1 tablespoon of citric acid and 8 cups of water. I added 2 tablespoons of that to start, and we got close to our classic broken violet colorway. I think we were slightly not acidic enough, so I wasn't able to capture things quickly and boldly, but we do definitely have more pink and more blue. It's just more subtle than with the vinegar. This is all to show that pH matters. Whether you use vinegar or citric acid, that ultimately doesn't matter. What matters is that you create recipes with your tap water and your yarn and conditions to create the colorways that you are the most happy with. And depending on your tap water, you might want slightly more acid or slightly less acid to start with than what I do to achieve the broken violet colorway. But now I'm gonna go ahead and wash these. I did not create my broken violet conditions overnight. It took time for me to develop that colorway. And so as like I troubleshooted and played with it, I was able to, and I'm able to now reproducibly get the color to break pretty perfectly each time I try. But if you're doing something like cake dyeing or adding other resist or changing the surface area, then things might function differently. So it's important to keep that in mind. I'm going to add a little bit of some clear dish soap. But yeah, I think that there's no bleeding. I'm not going to show the washing of the other 2 because it's the same amount of dye. Everything eventually was set with high acid. But this is looking great. I'm going to put the yarn through my spin dryer, hang it up to dry, and we'll pop back in to take a final look at the dry yarn. Here are the 4 colorways we created in today's video, where we started with 1 tablespoon of white vinegar, 1 tablespoon of citric acid, no acid at all, and then we used 2 tablespoons of our citric acid mixture, not the same one, but we mixed it the same. We used 1 tablespoon of citric acid and 8 cups of water, and then we took 2 tablespoons of that mixture and used that here with our final colorway. And I have a lot of thoughts. First off, our iconic colorway is beautiful as always, and I am very comfortable with these conditions because I spent a while sort of getting the acid concentration right so that way the reds would strike fast, but then the blues wouldn't quite start striking, so I could capture those bright blues at the end. If our pH is a little higher, so slightly less acidic, we can still capture a lot of breaking. But we have more red here in this end because it was absorbing slightly slower, and that gave a slightly less dramatic gradient than here. I think that with time and playing around with the amount of citric acid, I would be able to get conditions like our classic colorway, but it'll just take time. The thing that I find the most interesting is how similar, and yet different, but how similar the colorways are with high acid and starting with no acid. Both of these somewhat resemble our unbroken Wilton's Violet that I will have in a separate video that should be out by the time patrons can get early access to this video right now. Starting with the high acid, with our 1 tablespoon of citric acid, we have what feels like a purple gradient. There's lavender here at the end, purple down at the other end, and I think that's because our acid was high enough that the blues started striking along with the reds. Yes, there was a blue finish. Technically, there was still breaking, but we weren't able to capture it like we can here. And this is so reminiscent of the breaking commercial acid dyes that I did recently, and it's making me think I really do need to reduce the amount of acid further to try to separate the rates of absorption more, to really kind of capture that second color that we see left over in the end. The no acid is less ordered. We definitely captured some of that blue in the end, and there's no question that we see breaking in here. But again, the reds absorbed so far up and it took so long that we couldn't capture the breaking. And so even adding a little bit of acid really helps us make that more dramatic. What's fun now is that the way things are twisted makes our last one look like there's a lot more blue than the first, but it's just because that blue is more hidden within the twist. For this video, I've picked a really dramatic colorway to show how varying the pH can make a difference with how different colors absorb to yarn. Fundamentally, it doesn't matter whether you use vinegar or citric acid, but if you've been using vinegar for a long time and you want to switch to using citric acid, it might take a little bit of time to calibrate to get the same pH with the citric acid as you did with vinegar. And so I don't have an answer with the correct conversion for all of you. That will still take some trial and error for me to deal with. But I hope to play around with this more in the future and maybe bring out my pH meter so we can more accurately look at the comparison versus the very qualitative way we looked at this today. I really hope that this was helpful. And honestly, I'm thrilled. I'm absolutely thrilled we got such dramatic results. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and once again I would like to give a huge thank you to all of the ChemKnits patrons for supporting the content that I create here on the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel. If you are not already subscribed, please subscribe and turn on notifications by pressing that bell icon to make sure you never miss a new video. I release new videos every Tuesday and Friday morning. Plus, we get lots of bonus videos and fun stuff coming up, and so you really don't want to miss any of it. Thank you so much for watching, everyone.